Hello everyone, welcome to the Scumdogs Kennel. I'm your host, Chris Williams, and in today's Cryptid Corner mini-episode, today I have stories involving both Dogman and crypto-terrestrial fairy encounters, folks. Let's read the first story, titled Janesville, Wisconsin camp staffer hears human-like screams, growls, and heavy bipedal footfalls, and hear this man's story, or man and woman's story, folks. Let's get into it now. A summer camp staff member in Janesville, Wisconsin recalls a terrifying late-night encounter during the summer of 2019 when a human-like scream suddenly erupted near the staff cabins. What followed was a deep growl, screeching, and the unmistakable sound of something heavy running away on what seemed like two legs. Now, that sounds interesting, folks. Let's get into it and hear exactly, a few details before we hear the actual full story. Case file, date summer 2019, time approximately 1 o'clock a.m. to 1:30 a.m. Location, Janesville, Rock County, Wisconsin. Setting, summer camp staff cabins. Witness, T. Reported by T. Phenomena, human-like scream, deep growling, screeching, heavy bipedal footfalls, possible upright canine activity. Environmental conditions, nighttime. Cabins had screen doors and screen windows. Poison ivy later prevented examination of the area for tracks. Now, let's get into the actual story that T uploaded to people so that they can evaluate it and see if he could get any real answers about what actually happened. If it was Dogmen, or perhaps it was another kind of cryptid, folks. Now, let's read his actual eyewitness account and see where it goes from here, folks. At the camp where I work during the summer in Janesville, Wisconsin, the staff cabins have screen windows and screen doors. That means you can hear almost everything going on outside. One night, around 11 o'clock p.m., I left my cabin with my bunkmate to go take a shower. We got back to the cabin around 12:30 a.m. She crawled into her bed and fell asleep, but my ADHD kept me awake, so I put my earbuds in at low volume so I wouldn't wake her. The first rounds. Around 1 o'clock a.m., I thought I heard a fox screaming, or coyotes, in the distance. Since I'm a nature lover, I wanted to hear it more clearly, so I got up and stood by the door. I've always loved listening to coyotes and foxes calling in the distance. After a while, I went back to bed. Were these really foxes or coyotes, folks? They could be something else. Something maybe that walks on two legs. I would not be surprised if maybe this staffer, T here, mistook it. And I'm assuming that this is a woman, folks. Just because basically, T doesn't mention their gender. She mentions that her, bunkmate was female. And usually it's a woman and another woman when they're at camp. But let's move on to the next part of the story. The human-like scream. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard a high-pitched human-like scream. It lasted no more than 15 seconds before it turned into a deep growl mixed with screeching. That sound continued for about 30 seconds, all in one continuous breath. It was not spaced out like a fox or coyote call. I know distance when it comes to sounds, and whoever made that noise could have been, not have been more than 30 feet from the cabins. The witness reaction. When I tell you this, it sends shivers down my spine. I mean, it woke me up as I had just drunk 12 cups of coffee. I just sat up in bed, expecting to see something standing at my door, staring in at me. But there was nothing there. Then I heard loud thumping, like a galloping horse, but it sounded like it was running on two legs instead of four. It moved quickly in the opposite direction, away from the cabins. I got up and bolted the door as fast as I could. I knew that with screen doors and screen windows, that bolt probably wouldn't have done much, but it made me feel safer. I thought I was going nuts until my friend in the cabin next to me whispered, "Hey, did you hear that too?" The cabins are close together, and I could hear the panic in his voice. That was how I knew I wasn't dreaming. I don't know if anyone else heard it because a lot of the guys are heavy sleepers and my bunkmate was sleeping with earplugs in. Now, I do applaud this woman for locking the door, folks. But as she said, the windows were just screen windows and the door itself and the surrounding cabin had a lot of well, just screens, just for basically, well, in it and around it, not to mention the entire camp. So yeah, not much protection, folks. But let's read on. Aftermath. For the rest of the summer, I kept trying to figure out what it was because poison ivy was running rampant in the area where the noise had come from. Neither I nor anyone else could check for footprints. I planned to set up a trail camera in that area, but summer camp did not run in 2020 due to low attendance, so I was unable to get back out there to set it up. In the 5 years I've worked there, we have found a lot of absolutely shredded deer carcasses, turkeys, and other smaller animals. I've been trying to figure out what the hell I heard that night because it has haunted me for a while now. There is no way it was any animal I've heard before. And I do completely believe that's the truth there, folks. Well, that it was probably any animal she had heard before. Could have been an actual, well, cryptid? Perhaps. But the fact that, well, a lot of activity with some sort of animal was going on there, folks. Shredded, well, carcasses and, well, a lot of things that basically point to something big there, folks. Makes me think it could have been a dogman, but only maybe saying it's a chance. But let's move on now. And I'm sorry about being abrupt there, folks. Let's get to the next article, titled Tiny Winged Fairy Seen in Kentucky Magic Garden. Many years ago, a woman visiting an off-grid homestead on 150 acres near Kentucky's Daniel Boone National Forest experienced what she still remembers as a real magic garden. The property had a spring Clear Creek vegetable gardens, flower forest, a cave, and an atmosphere she described as sacred. But what began as a peaceful visit soon became a remarkable account involving a tiny winged humanoid, strange lights, circular impressions in the grass, and an overwhelming sense that the land was being watched and protected. Now, let's read a few more facts in the case file. Date, many years ago. Time, daytime initial sighting. Nighttime late observation in early morning grass circles. Location, private property in Kentucky near Daniel Boone National Forest. Setting, off-grid cabin. Gardens, forested acreage, creek and cave area. Witnesses, female witness, name not given. Reported by not given. Phenomenon, tiny winged humanoids, fairy-like lights, circular grass impressions, sacred land sensation, possible cave-related spiritual activity. Environmental conditions, lush garden setting, active pollinators, Clear Creek forested land, nighttime observation from porch, early morning dew. Let's, well, consider these facts, folks. Our witness, who doesn't want to basically be known publicly, reports the fact that she saw this tiny winged humanoid and that she thinks that maybe the area itself might have been basically sacred or have some spiritual significance. Maybe this led to the actual encounter itself. But we'll decide that after we read the actual account now. Many years ago, I was dating a guy who was really into camping and hiking, as I am. We spent a lot of time camping in primitive sites, which I have always preferred to car camping. He wanted to take me to visit his dear friends who lived in Kentucky. They had 150 acres near the Daniel Boone National Forest. The couple, whom I call Dan and Gina, lived in an off-grid cabin that Dan had built himself. There was a cleared home site, and Gina grew all of their vegetables and fruit. The main property was bordered and in some places divided by a very clear creek that flowed down from a cave further up on the property. The water was so clear that you could safely drink from it. Gina's gardens were magical. After a very long drive, my boyfriend and I got out of the vehicle and I met Dan and Gina. Gina immediately gave me a tour of the gardens. It does sound magical, folks, and very, very interesting. Let's read on. Everything was lush. There were bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds everywhere, and the whole place felt sacred. Dan and Gina were true stewards of that land. As Gina was showing me a little line of crops near the tree line, I became distracted by what I thought was a huge insect flying around me on my right side. I kept seeing it in my peripheral vision, darting toward me and then away. I'm not afraid of bees, but this one was really persistent and it seemed unusually large. I finally turned to look, and my mouth fell open in shock. There, hovering near my shoulder, was a tiny little man. As I was thinking here as I was reading this, that the land itself felt sacred and magical here, folks. It almost feels like another story involving another fairy account where this woman in her garden was being visited by these people, and they saw these beings on the land, much like this tiny fairy entity, folks. And, well, in both accounts, you get the feeling that the land itself is somehow just, well, magical, almost infused with some sort of, well, mischief and might, or should I say, yeah, and maybe some essence from a fairy story. I get the feeling here too, folks, but let's read on. He had inky black hair, pointy ears, and clothing that looked almost as though it were made from a deep green leaves. His wings moved extremely fast, and they sounded like a hummingbird's wings. I blinked several times because I was sure it had to be, well, driver fatigue. Then he put his hands up near his ears, wiggled his fingers, blew a raspberry at me, and flew off. I turned to look at Gina. I had just met her, and did not want her to think I was nuts. She saw my face and giggled. Then, in the sweetest Kentucky accent, she said, "Did you see one of our fairies? They must like you. You'll get to see the fairy lights tonight and the rings tomorrow morning." I was still in a state of disbelief, despite all the strange things I had seen in my life. I had never seen fairies, gnomes, or any other similar magical folk. In fact, folks, this might be the same story I'm thinking about here, folks. I've heard about it before, but then again, this story has a few details that are different from what I remember, so maybe it's a different account entirely. But let's read on once more, folks. That night, we sat on the front porch, surrounded by trellises full of perfumed flowers, listening to the sounds of the forest. I remember Gina tapping my arm and pointing toward the far end of the cleared yard. There were tiny lights in the grass. They were not like fireflies. These held a steady glow and rose in the air, then fell again, then up and down again. This continued for at least an hour. We watched in silence. It felt as though we were sitting inside a magic bubble. That night, my boyfriend and I camped outside in a tent. I slept deeply and woke early, before anyone else. I tiptoed outside barefoot and walked through the grass. I remember the feeling of dew on my feet. As I walked around, I saw 3 different circles in the grass. They were perfect imprints where the grass had been flattened down in circles. The rest of my visit included many incredible experiences. I got to know Dan and Gina and enjoyed being in what felt like an off-grid paradise. We hiked up to the cave and wandered toward its deep back, where there were many pictoglyphs left by tribes long ago. Very interesting, folks. Now, in the account I'm thinking about, the story mostly ended after the woman or witness saw the fairy. This story goes a bit deeper and even mentions, well, native tribes that basically used to be in the land, pictoglyphs and stuff like that, as well as, well, fairy entities that sound very reminiscent of European folklore. But let's read the story before we come to any conclusions. Dan told us that if you were there at night, you could hear drumming and chanting in the caves, but we did not go back after dark. I felt as though it would have been trespassing. It seemed as if hundreds of eyes were on us. I felt such deep reverence while on that land. Many years later, I still think about Dan and Gina and wonder if they still live there, tending their land and protecting the magical folk. And maybe they do, folks. But maybe they've also been basically spirited away by these magical folk, perhaps. Now, in Native American lore, folks, they have their own fairies as well. And you would think that these entities would, well, resemble them rather than typical European-style fairies that basically became more popular in the 19th century. Because in both accounts of fairies, folks, they're mentioned of being tiny entities like these, with the Native American ones basically being mentioned as wearing Native American clothing, mostly. But here, this sounds like a typical fairy you'd see from basically any children's television program, so that's incredibly odd. Now, with the first story with the Dogmen, folks, the witness doesn't actually say that she saw a Dogman, but from the description and feeling you get, it really does sound like a Dogman account. It doesn't sound like it's a Bigfoot, which I would not basically be surprised if it were. But nonetheless, an odd story. In fact, both stories are incredibly odd, and makes me think that, well, there is an air of truth to basically some of it, but maybe the account with the fairy, it sounds basically it could be embellished a bit. Maybe the woman basically misremembered details? Perhaps. Either way, we're at the end, so please go subscribe to my YouTube channel, Read Comics They're Bad For You. You can use the YouTube link down below in descriptions or the chat to go subscribe me. Hit that like button for me. Make sure you're still subscribed. Leave some comments down below. Hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you hit the part of the bell that give you all future notifications, and please share this video out. I'm Chris Williams from the Scumdogs Kennel. Thank you all for joining me. I'll be back again tomorrow with another great video. So be sure to come back again then. Until next time, folks, I'll see you all again soon.